Let's get more analysis on the recruitment of child suicide bombers and speak to Martin Reardon. He's with the Sufan group that provides security intelligence services to governments and multinational organizations. Many thanks for joining us, Martin. Now, the Turkish government believes that it is a child between the age of 12 to 14 who might have been behind this attack, possibly wearing a suicide vest. Is this unusual for Daesh to use someone of this age?
No, not at all. I think we haven't seen this in bombing so much with Daesh, but the cubs of the caliphate, they're children fighters. They recruit them very young. They indoctrinate them into that violent ideology, and then they expose them to violent acts to incentivize them to the killing. So the fact that they would be using this child suicide bomber, not unusual. And this is not unusual worldwide. This happens throughout Africa. The Islamic State predecessor, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, did the same thing with teenage suicide bombers throughout the 2000s.
Apparently there's such a thing as the cubs of the caliphate that Daesh has been cultivating. I mean, where do these child fighters get recruited from?
Well, primarily with Islamic State, they're recruited there in Syria or in the parts of Iraq that they still occupy. They're in these cities, they have total control over the populations, and they take the young children and they put them in schools. They identify some of them for this indoctrination. And again, you teach them this ideology day in and day out. You show them people being killed, and in some cases, this is on videotapes on YouTube, these children will actually do the killings themselves. They're insensitized. It's also possible with the suicide bomber that they didn't even know what they were about to do. The explosive could have been set off remotely, so they're just told because they are children, they're less scrutinized, walk over towards this direction or in this area, and then the bomb is set off remotely.
Martin, in this particular incident, it was a Kurdish family, a Kurdish wedding that was targeted. What is your speculation on why it was the Kurdish side of things that was targeted?
Well, I think two things. First of all, the Kurds have been one of the most effective fighting forces against Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And so this could be revenge against the Kurds for some recent successes that they've had on the battlefield. Also, this just further intensifies or it aggravates the tensions between the government of Turkey and the Kurdish population. Not sure who did what, so it just adds tension to that relationship.
We've heard from the government in the last 24 hours or so saying they're going to do absolutely everything they can to get rid of Daesh in this part of the world. It's not something it's something we've heard before, but it feels, at least it appears to feel like the government perhaps doesn't seem to be on top of this problem. We're constantly seeing every few months more attacks. Do you feel the Turkish government has a handle on these security problems?
Well, I don't think anybody in the region has a handle on what's happening. That's why these attacks keep on occurring. I think the Turkish government is being more and more aggressive against Islamic State. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the coming weeks with continued cooperation with the coalition forces or even with the Russian forces. But you know, these attacks, you're seeing an increase in terrorist attacks outside the conflict zones, in large part because Islamic State is losing somewhat on the battlefield. So they're resorting back to the terrorist attacks, bombings or assaults outside the conflict zones. That's what we've seen in Europe. It's what we're seeing in Turkey right now. But yes, the Turkish government is fighting back, but Islamic State is not going anywhere in the near term. They're going to continue to be a significant threat regionally and outside the region for quite some time.
We're running out of time. Just briefly, Martin, I mean, it's one of the big conflicts Turkey has been having with the US is the role of YPG in the fight against Daesh, that Turkey themselves consider an association with the PKK terrorist group. How is that situation going to resolve itself? Is the US going to have to take one side or the other?
No, I think, and again, this has been long term. I think what the U.S. will continue to do is support the Kurds because that has been the most effective fighting force on the ground. They're actually taking back territory, fighting force on the ground in Syria and northern Iraq. I think this is going to continue to be a bone of contention between the United States and Turkey, but the United States and Turkey are long-term close allies. They're going to work around this and maintain that alliance.
Okay, Martin, really good to speak to you. Martin Reardon from the Sufan Group.